Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm seeing a few people. Yeah, grab some more. I'm seeing a few people trickle in, but I think we can get ready to get started. I know we have an amazing deck of panelists here and only 40 minutes to try to cover everything innovation in K-12 in Latin America. But it's really wonderful to see everybody here and interested in the space as well. I think what I'll do is just get started, and I'll start all the way at the end of my left. And maybe I'll introduce myself first. I'm Opelo. I work for Endeavor Global. I lead the education and talent portfolio there. All the way at the end of the panel, we have Fernando from Camino Education. Next to him, we have Viviana, founder of TICMAS. We have Maria, founder CEO of Crack the Code. And to my immediate left, we have Raphael, founder CEO of TutorMundi. So I think what we're going to do is aim for a really sort of lively conversation and get everybody's different thoughts on the subject today. And I'm going to jump in straight to a question, which is, of the 155 million school-aged children across Latin America and the Caribbean, 0 to 14-year-old students, 24% of Argentina, 21% of Brazil, 25% of Peru. What do you think that some of the successes and the failures of public education or education in these markets have been over time? Let me start with Fernando, because you're smiling here and super ready to get into it.
All right, thank you. Well, welcome. It's great to be here to chat with you all. Well, obviously, the challenges are easier to identify. I wouldn't call it challenges. Let's just talk about the patterns, maybe, right? At all levels. I mean, you would see in Brazil especially, there's one aspect which I think is very important. It's the cultural aspect. I'm not sure that the Brazilian society as a whole give as much importance to formal education as other places. There's an issue with, a systems issue, which is the governance is very complex. And it's very rigid. So it's difficult to, at the end of the day, implement policies that provide a thorough change, comprehensive change. At the school levels, the schools level, there is an issue with the infrastructure, both the physical and now the digital infrastructure. At the teacher level, there could be big advances in professional development and in salaries and recognition in general. At the classroom level, and this is probably a place where I would like to spend time on in this conversation, is the classroom, what's happening, the actual instructional model and engagement, and whether or not students are actually being invited to do something that they would like to do, that they can't do elsewhere. And so there's that issue too, and obviously the correlated issues, which are dropout rates, which are super high and low academic performance in general. So these are more of the, I would say, the challenges. There are great successes, especially coming from the private market, which is a leader in innovation. And if you see how private schools in Brazil partner with third-party providers, you'd probably find good partnerships going on in there. Unlike what's happening with the government, and we can talk about that later. And also, I think that the not-for-profits in Brazil are super strong. There are great not-for-profit organizations that team up with the government very, very effectively. And it's a big chunk of what's happening in public education today in terms of the advances coming from these not-for-profits, or just to kickstart.
Great, and we'll get back to classroom and privatization of education as well. Maybe we can go down the line. Viviana, what are the successes and challenges that you've observed?
I would say that public sector has to push for more connectivity around each country. Connectivity is fundamental for this. And the private sector company as ours has to push for innovation that really put the focus for the whole family to see how education should be in this modern world. New models of learning, new ways of making personalized trajectories for the learning. Each student, each child is different, so we have to take advantage of their talents, and so the learning should not be uniform. So we have to work on this kind of developments, pushing for these innovations, for taking decisions with data in all schools, so we can make a change on the future of our kids.
I believe, talking more on the private sector, I think there's a big problem because we don't have enough supply of private schools. There's long wait lists of students that want to get into these schools because parents usually make decisions on where to put their kids in school because of a brand that a school has. That makes the school have a lot of power and not innovate to be more competitive, right? When they have a long list of wait list students, they don't have any incentive to innovate and really be the #1 in terms of curriculum. And I think it's to blame a little on the parent side because they're not asking and really questioning what schools are teaching. They just make a decision based on the brand, the location, the social statement that it means selecting a school. So I think as parents, we have to start questioning more what the schools are doing to really innovate within their curriculum and have it really represent current society and not what we used to live like 50 years ago. And this means on the let's say, business side, we have to push for more competition on the school sector. The more competition there will be with schools, the more it will push schools to really innovate and transform within their curriculum and what they offer schools. So I think we have to work a lot on the parent side of asking for more and questioning, and also trying to incentivize more competition on the school side.
Wow, I heard a lot. That was the first time that I heard that Latin America, maybe Brazil, is strong in nonprofits. I would like to hear more about it. Because especially when you compare here, you know, we have difficulties of giving money to the nonprofits. Besides Fundação Lehman and Fundação Educar, I would love to hear what they are doing. But, and I'm really worried about your comment that you said more private schools. Really concerned about this. We can talk later. I don't know. Maybe the things that I see that Brazil, at least, did good in the past years is the creation of the standardized exam. Guys, this really helped a lot. We used to choose which university we want to study, and it was a one-year shot. If you get it wrong, here you go, another year. And now finally you have an exam similar to the SAT here in US, where you do once and you can apply everywhere. Another thing that we got it right was the new high school. Yes, we are walking very slowly, but the plan is there. And I see already some movements. I think even your company, right, Fernando, already adapted for the new high school, which basically is the inclusion of more extracurricular courses instead of just the core, math, physics. Now, maybe the student will have the ability to, I don't know, maybe do some coding in high school, maybe practice argumentation. And so these are the good things. Eduardo Mufarrege, who is a great leader of education in Brazil, many of you might know him, he published an open letter for the Ministry of Education a couple of years ago, which is tricky because we have already changed it 4 times, I think, in the last 4 years, so the letter is not for him anymore. But anyways, he mentions that, you know, we still need to update this standardized exam, we still need to apply the new high school, but I think the main problem there, at least in my view, I might be wrong here, but was the lack of objective. You know, we don't know where we are going. We don't have it. It's not clear in our mind what we want to become, what we want to become known for. I think that will help.
I think let me pick up on a few themes that I've noticed. So we've talked about school, we've talked about classrooms, we've talked about engagement. I want to go back to schools and maybe ask you, Viviana, what you've been noticing over time around schools and their approach to digitization and supporting the students that are requesting and requiring more and more relevant skills and relevant curricula. What has your work been in that space, and what have you been observing?
Okay, you have to follow the curricula because that's what in each country the Minister of Education wants, and you have to do it. But really, you have to push for another methods of learning to create engagement for the students. The presentation of the content should be attractive for the students. If not, they get bored. If not, they don't want to go to school. Really says, it's what this for? So it's important to understand how you present the content, how the way you create engagement through the activities you create, using interrelationship between different subjects. It's not just math, it's math what for daily problems. It's math related with geography, math related with history. You can do that. So that's its integration. That's another way of presenting things. And understanding what's the talent of each child. So if he's more artistic, try to present the content of history based on artistic. So this kind you need a platform, you need technology. If not, teachers will be crazy. They cannot manage 20 different students. But if you can do it with technology that can show you what the interest and how is the performance of each student in front of a video, in front of an activity, a test, or whatever, she can manage all that. And so the students will be more productive, efficient, but also more passion about knowledge.
Yep. And I think, let me pick up on some of the themes you're talking about, which is around personalization and engagement, and maybe targeted towards Fernando, because I know you have a lot of thoughts around active learning, engagement, and aligning students and teachers. And so curious, Fernando, what have you been seeing around how to keep students engaged and how to support faculty, teachers in doing that?
Well, we have at Camino, we have a digital platform called Chloe. It's an active learning digital platform that we're offering to public and private schools. And we're basically partnering with teachers so that they can teach more student-centered class, enabled by data and with digital technologies. So, and we also have a school, Camino School, in which we are basically focusing on active learning. What we are seeing now is that there are in my mind, three issues with education overall, public and private. First is access. Obviously, the public market is focusing on access. Brazil has provided much more access to students than before in the past 20 years. It has evolved a lot. The second is quality, and that's where it becomes a bigger issue with the public schools. Much less so with the private market, but still based on a very traditional, old-fashioned model of instruction. And the last one is relevance, which is really the way that people are actually connecting what they're doing inside the classroom with what they need to be know in terms of skills and content in the future. That is a place where I think even the private schools are facing an enormous issue, partly because of what was said regarding how much the incumbent schools are married to the current more traditional methods of education, which don't really communicate with students. In my mind, the most important word in education going forward, on top of learning, which has obviously always been important, is engagement. I mean, these kids are used now to products that are only focused on engagement, or by and large focused on engagement. How do you get a student to be focused on, or a user to be doing something using a platform that really creates an effective engagement that the student is identified with, that produces an iterative and a recurrent behavior in terms of going back to the product, using it more, engaging with the platforms and so forth, and also cognitive engagement, which is at the end of the day the mental effort that you're doing to learn. We are in the beginning of this journey, I think, to develop products that are actually more engaging. But that will come, I think, part of it is the technology, but a lot of it has to do with the pressure that the families and the kids especially will more and more put on the schools worldwide, not only in Latin America. For a student to go in on YouTube and find a video class of a traditional lecture on any content for free means that going to school and spending 5 hours in a row, 5 days a week, to do the same thing, to have that same type of service, is something that is different from what used to happen 20 years ago, where we, as students, or the students then, didn't have that choice. And anywhere where digital technology was able to replace the existing service for free, there was a tremendous disruption. Obviously, here this means partnering with the teachers, and this is what we're trying to do. You start with a teacher, because there's nothing that's going to happen without the teacher. But you have to invite the teacher to take the step forward, to continue to do what they know, which is to teach well, and to have a good relationship with the kids, as opposed to create a dilemma and say that what has been done before was wrong. But also integrate those practices into new things, into a new platform, into a new model of instruction that is based on engagement. And this is a student-centered model where students are actually doing things. It's active learning. Students are not just sitting there passively taking notes and then to pass the exam, because this is what is already available for free elsewhere. This is where we're going.
I think this is an exact point and a perfect moment to, I think, dig into Maria and crack the code, which started as an after-school, in-person physical location before the pandemic and pivoted to being online. And so I wanna ask you sort of two questions. The first is, what have you seen in terms of parental shifts, jumping from Fernando's point, parental attitudes and behaviors towards putting their students online? And secondly, what is the content and skills that you're seeing a huge appetite for young children in Peru and maybe even beyond ages 5 to 18? What skills do they want to learn, and how are you kind of providing that?
Sure. So I think the pandemic was really great in several aspects. First, pre-pandemic, parents in Latin America were super against digital learning or online learning for their kids. We don't have that culture within us like other ethnicities do, or customs that they have of coming back to school and continue to study by themselves in their house. We don't have that culture. Parents want the kids to be outside doing activities. The pandemic showed parents, firstly, that kids can learn online. Of course, you don't want them to have the whole school experience online, but once, twice, 3 times a week, it can work. Secondly, they realize that it's important for students and kids to be independent with technology. They need to know how to use it, how to create it, how to be independent and not rely on them to do basic things or even more complex things. And then thirdly, I think something very important that happened was that all of a sudden, parents were spectators of the classes. I mean, their kids were having class online in the living room. So parents heard what they were teaching and they started, asking for more and criticizing some of the kids, the teachers, and, even some of my friends were complaining, I can't believe my son is still learning this and he's in 1st grade. He should be learning this and X, Y, and Z. So I think bringing the classroom in the household really sort of shifted the power a little to the parent side and allowed them to demand more of the education that their kids were receiving. In terms of skills, I think, schools now more than ever realize that, they have to be in the know of what is happening in the, in the workforce or even in higher education sector, right? They can't be just oblivious of the fact that the skills that are required nowadays are completely different than the ones 30, 40 years ago. So more and more parents are realizing that their kids need to learn digital skills. In my case, we teach computer science to kids, so they know their kids need to learn how to program, how to create their own technology, not just use technology. So I think it has been very positive in that sense. Of course, there's a lot of work to be done. The way decisions are made within schools is very complex. I would love to hear, Fernando, your experience and how you sell to schools, even public schools, because it's so hard to really get them to understand the value that technology can have in their classrooms. So, you know, a lot of positive things, but still a lot of work to be done within the schools in the region.
No, great, and maybe we can get back to the question a little bit later, but I want to give Raphael a moment to chat as well, and I want to bring up, you know, a stat, 15-year-olds in Latin America and the Caribbean are 3 years behind, according to, OECD in math, reading, and science. How do you see the opportunity for EdTech to specifically target those 3 areas, and how are you kind of approaching that as a founder yourself?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Let me just ask you a question. Do you have kids, Maria? 2. Are you afraid of them spending the whole day in the...
Of what?
Are they spending the whole day in the internet learning?
Well, they're really
Like,
young still.
they're really young, so okay. Well, I'm not afraid, actually. Maybe they can stay the whole day. This pandemic, I have 3 kids. I saw my kids studying the whole day. I was really shocked in the beginning, but they spent like almost more than 5 hours. So maybe it can happen. Going back to your question, I think it's, we always say that we need to make education fun, right? So the kids can engage, and we create all these gamification things. And I'm not gonna lie, I have gamification on my platform as well, because it actually works. But I think, in order to, as you said, as you were pointing some data that Latin America is so behind in math and writing, and what I think is, how can we work with the motivation? I see that people have many motivations to study, Why do we study, actually? Do we study to change our economic status? Do we study because we want some fame and recognition among our peers? Or do we study for the sake of it? I think Socrates liked to talk about this. He was talking like, what is a bird without wings? Right? So what is a human being without using the brain, basically? So it seems to me that the higher achievers are not worried about having fun. They find the fun on doing so, on studying. It's a chicken and egg problem. What comes first? Is the fun that creates the motivation, or the motivation, the self-motivation that creates the fun? The student feels joy when they learn. And I think that's the highest challenge. Of course, there is the infrastructure problem. Even though someone is motivated, if they don't have access to it, how can they keep up? And I don't have the answer, honestly. But I think that's where we could try to attack. Why do I study? Do I want to become like X, and why do I have role models? Because what happens is, when you see it from middle school to high school, it goes from 98% registration of the population to 70% to high school. Basically, what it says is, okay, now I'm 14, 15 years old. Hey, dad, hey, mom, force me. I'm not going to school. This is not going to work. I'm observing the world around me. I better play. I better dance. I better work. I better do something else, because this plan that you guys are offering me are not working. So I think that's the point that we could focus first.
Viviana, I'm curious, what are you seeing in terms of motivation and that pivot, even if it's from middle to high school in Argentina?
let's say we have to change the way we are teaching. Kids born curious. They want to know. One of the first words they use is why? Why? What's going on? What happened? And they lose this curiosity why they travel through the school. And they reach in middle and high school saying, okay, it's the same. Okay, leave it. And they are only enthusiastic about what they have interest on. So we have to create interest in knowledge, in the experience of learning. And so we have to change the way schools teach. That's so simple and so difficult.
I actually want to turn for a quick minute to the audience, and I want to ask two questions. One, which is, does anybody have children or young people that they're taking care of between the ages of 0 and 18 right now enrolled in school? Okay. Does anyone work with children, so as an educator or a teacher? Or? Okay. I think it's helpful to get a sense of, where is this hitting in the room and how is this applying to the folks in the space. And let me maybe turn to you, Fernando, and see, you and Raphael, both Brazil, are you seeing the same challenge around motivation? When you were building with Leticia Camino schools, what were you thinking in terms of creating an environment that would keep children curious and eager to keep learning?
Yeah, well, in my mind, it's less a function of being fun. I wouldn't frame it like that. I think it has to be engaging. Engaging means first that the student is identified with what's happening, effectively engaged. The other factor in my mind is behaviorally engaged, that the students are actually participating in class and that they are cognitively engaged. It means that they are doing that mental effort to learn. They're investing time to learn. I think learning is something that requires effort. Learning is actually effort. You don't reorganize your neural patterns, your mental models without consolidating information that's coming from the outside with what you know. That requires effort. So it is an effortful exercise. But the school can do that starting from the student, not starting from the teacher. In the sense that in any other industry, there's a migration from the producer to the user. You take, and this is coming a lot from the digital revolution. A lot of time and money is invested to learn who the user is, to design personas. And this is the first time that I actually hear that in education, that we're thinking about students as users, as personas, and the teachers too. What are they doing when they are teaching? What are the students' needs? What is an optimal learning experience, which is different from having a bunch of authors produce a textbook that has nothing to do in terms of the mindset with what's going to happen in the classroom, the learning experience. It's not wrong, it's just different. It's a different product. And a school will typically design a classroom so that a teacher can teach in the same way to everyone, like she has always done. And now I think there's a different need from society and from that student that the experience is better, that the student is actually engaged, is doing something that this student would not be having access to at home that would be better. Again, using the YouTube example. If I'm sitting there, I'm 14 years old, I'm watching 5 hours straight of traditional lectures on a topic, and I use my iPhone and I turn on YouTube and I have thousands of videos with graphs, with music, why would I spend time doing that? So why would I spend time on school? So what else is happening in the classroom to engage? Is it that the students are actually doing something with the content? Are they doing research? Are they collaborating? Are they asking questions? Are they being challenged? Partly is the curriculum, and I think the Brazilian curriculum has gone, as was said by Raphael, one step further to include skills. But most of it is the pedagogy, is the actual instructional model. And so you have to invite the teachers, and it's a complex issue, invite them well to learn with you as they go, class by class, that they should be going one step further and in terms of what they are doing, including the lecture part. It has to be lecture. Otherwise, with project-based learning, there's, I'm sure you know, tons of research that show that if you don't know you don't have access to the prior content, you don't actually learn to apply. So you need content. So the lecture part is important, but it's not all that's happening in the school. So talking about coding, talking about new disciplines is one thing. The other is what is happening in the classroom where they're teaching math and English and chemistry, history. If it's the same that has always happened before, I don't think that these kids will be engaged. Maybe we were, because of some extrinsic motivation, could be, in my case, to make sure that my parents would not be mad at me or the teachers would not be mad at me. But it worked. It's different from today, where the students at the end of the day, obviously they will always be concerned with that, but they have an alternative. They can always go back to the parents and say, I don't need that in order to pass. And so the challenge now is on the schools to provide a service that goes beyond what was done before. And this is what we're trying to support schools to do. In Latin America, I believe, the four of us, but anywhere else. I mean, you take the conference, everyone's talking about student-centered education and data and personalization, adaptation. These are things that I imagine that 10 years ago people would not be talking about, because who cares about the user at the end of the day? The user has to be there. So it's about the producer, the teacher, and the author. So it's a different world.
Yeah.
Did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, it's we talked here about fun, motivation, and I really don't know how to create that motivation in the student, the self-motivation that makes him or her go by themselves. But one thing is true. We have a very hard problem to solve in Latin America, which is the quality of the teachers in the public sector. Because now that we have basically an emerging private market for education at scale, all the good teachers are moving. And just to give you an idea of what that is, I was 10 years old when my family broke, and I moved from a private school, very fine, to a public school at night. All of a sudden my peers were 18 years old, smoking during the recess. The ladies would put me in their laps. It was quite fun, actually, this part. But, you know, I noticed the difference. And then, to prepare for the college entry exam, I convinced my parents to put me in the private school again in the last year. And I remember crying in the first day, because I couldn't believe that the teachers were so good. And I worked a lot, and I eventually got the first place in the math exam of the college entry exam among more than 30,000 students. And I'm sure that would be impossible without the quality of the teachers that I received in the very end of the road. But another story that really, really scared me, that happened just 2 years ago, we decided to make an experiment with my kids. We thought that they were very spoiled, and we put them for 3 months in a public school. It was a fine public school in a neighborhood called Itaguaçu in Florianópolis. I don't know if you know, but it's a fine. Just the house of the vice-governor is in that neighborhood, okay? After 2 weeks of class, my wife goes to school, and no teacher. All the kids, the 8-year-old kids are playing. What happened? We don't know. The teacher didn't show up. My wife said, okay, I'm gonna stay here waiting. 1 hour passes, nothing. She ended up spending the whole day and taught them. Next day, same story. Next day, same story. My wife ended up teaching a full week of class. After 1 week, the principal shows up at the school, at the room. Who are you? She says the story. Well, you can't be here. The teacher went through a surgery and she's recovering, and we are gonna work it out. 1 month passes with no classes, you know? So that's the reality that we are facing the public systems. It wasn't like this 30 years ago or 20 years ago when I studied, but it is right now. And that really scares me.
I think this is exactly sort of where I would like to take the last sort of 5 minutes of this conversation, is actually around what do you think the responsibility of EdTech is across the region and across your respective markets in bridging the scale and size of this gap and working with the public system and public education in order to deliver at scale. Because we're right? Privatization is a thing that we talk about, but there isn't actually as much access to a majority of the population, and this panel really is about closing the gap. So I want to maybe go down the panel and think, what do you think the role of EdTech really is in actively closing the gap and working with public educators and education?
If I may kick off that, I think it's look, there are 40 million students in the public market in Brazil and 10 million in the private. As the technology enables us to offer something that's more affordable, like in any other industry, the technological experience is cheaper than the physical asset. And so you can dream of offering great quality to public students in the same way as the private students, which in Latin America is a novelty. Now, there are two big challenges to that, to sell into the government. In our experience, it has little to do with how much teachers are or are not prepared to use technology or willing to use technology. I think that they are willing to do so, and with the right support, they're prepared to do so. The issue is more fundamental. How do you actually sell to the government? And the regulation is such, the laws are such that every time you have to sell, you go through a bid where someone with a lower price and perhaps with a worse solution, with a worse educational offering, will be able to sell. And that makes it very difficult to actually, and I know it's probably different in the US and Brazil, this is a huge hurdle. The second one has to do with corruption. So you have to make sure that you're actually selling and following with the right compliance laws. And so I think that this is one of the reasons why I said that the not-for-profit are being able to partner better with the government, because they're actually not selling to the government. They're offering it for free. And they're getting their money through hybrid financing or through the donors financing, which is a different model, much harder to scale, but much more fit for in a place like that. That being said, I think technology is the biggest opportunity that we have in public education in Brazil and elsewhere. Obviously, today there's a large gap between what the students have and don't have in terms of access to technology. But there is a technological leapfrog that can happen, and I would invite you all to read, if you haven't, Rebecca Winthrop's book on leapfrog education, which at the end of the day is how can we tackle the scaling problem through technology. There are many governments in Brazil that are already investing in providing technological education solutions to the schools and infrastructure. 7.5% of the revenues that the government is receiving from the 5G auction have to be spent on digital technologies, digital infrastructure in public schools. That there are many institutions, including the Lehman Foundation that was mentioned here, that are working with the governments to make sure that that money is well spent. If the schools are actually able to access that technology, the private sector or the not-for-profit sector will provide the rest, which is obviously, once the road is there, make sure that there is appropriate professional development and content getting there, so that everyone has access to something that's more affordable, but that's actually able to close the gap that would be impossible without the technology and otherwise.
Great. And Viviana, Maria, I want to hear from you both before we wrap. Thank you, Fernando.
Just to be very, make a resume, I think technology has to be a tool for helping teachers to make the class what they develop skills, teamwork, creativity, communication, all that in classrooms, and technology, and then the rest, the content has to be technology, a tool that facilitates that. It's a tool also that engages students, and it's a tool that gives information and data for governments to take good decisions. But really, it has to facilitate the worst so education can change.
No, I agree 100%. I think the key is through teachers. And I agree with Fernando. I've seen a lot partnerships through non-for-profits that private organizations can have an impact through these non-for-profit partnerships. So I think we have to get creative, not rely 100% on the government, unfortunately, and try to find alternative routes to give access to students and teachers that otherwise wouldn't be able to access it.
Great, and maybe I will leave Raphael and Maria to have a debate with anybody else who wants to about if there needs to be more private schools or less private schools. But we're just at time, and I want to thank everybody for coming out to this panel and thank these incredible panelists and continuing to build.